you. So good morning everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Norfolk Police and Crime Panel. I'm Brian Long, I'm the chairman. This meeting is being held here in person at County Hall and is also being streamed live on our YouTube channel. We're not expecting a fire alarm test during the meeting, but if it does sound, we must evacuate the building, and in the event of emergency, please make your way to the nearest exit and meet at the muster point, which is on the main car park out the front. Now, at the moment, I'm running without a vice chair. I don't need to elect one as far as I'm certain, but we are expecting Sarah, so she may be just a bit delayed. So we'll carry on regardless, and hopefully she'll join us soon. Nikki, can I ask you to give us details of any apologies and any substitutes that we have available to us?
Thank you. Apologies received today from Councillor Jade Martin and her substitute, Councillor Trevor Wainwright.
Okay, apologies from them. And next item, item 2, the minutes of the last meeting, which was held back on the 31st of July. Can I sign those? Oh, wasn't it? It was the 28th of October, so it just shows you can't always believe what's on your notes. 28th of October meeting. Can I sign those as a true record, please? Thank you. Item 3, members to declare any interests. Don't expect we have any, no. And item 4 is updates from myself. Now, so that panel members know, I went along to the Norfolk leaders meeting and got an in-principle decision from that body that they would contribute to our ongoing costs of running the police and crime panel. As members will recall, we had an item come here as an agenda item, and obviously looked at the fact that our spending had gone up since 2011, when the original amount was set by the Home Office, and we now exceed the grant slightly. And Norfolk leaders agreed that they would take through their individual processes the ability to fund the additional, so that we don't have to curtail what we do in terms of officer support or attendance at regional or national conferences or events, which I think is good news. It shows the support from all of those organisations. Item 5 is public questions, and we don't have any. And that moves us on to, I think, what is, without question, the main item for today's agenda, and that is the Police and Crime Commissioner's proposed police precept for 2026-27. Starts on page 30 of the agenda body, but I'll come to the Commissioner first, Sarah, to introduce your budget, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the proposal this year, put very sort of in summary form, is to raise the precept in relation to policing by the maximum. This takes account of a number of different things, not least the consultation exercise that was undertaken. And you'll appreciate that while that was framed in terms of a proposal to raise to the maximum based on last year's, there is a differential there, which is relatively small, but there nonetheless. I think my overriding concern, and it's one that I've shared with, or that is shared with my PCC colleagues, relates to an increasing burden on local people and an increasing burden or presumption on council tax to remedy a shortfall in central government funding for the police. All of us, without exception, have raised that as a grave area for concern into national government. I am really not content with that position. However, all of that said, and I did want to make that really clear, all of that said, I am legally obliged to present a budget in relation to policing in Norfolk, and it is my intention to make sure that the police have everything that they need and that we can provide to them to ensure that Norfolk remains one of the safest places to live in the country. So since the consultation was put together, you'll be aware that the funding settlement was made, inevitably somewhat the 11th hour, and with rather thinner than usual level of information presented in there. You'll also be aware of the fact that there are other conversations ongoing in relation to funding of policing. The police reform white paper still is not out. This meeting is somewhat earlier in sort of timeline than it might be. So on balance, I have requested that the precept be set to the maximum. I should say that if the national government had said that the maximum was, say, £20 a year, with a really substantial difference between the amount that was stated in the consultation question and the amount that they allow me to raise, then I probably would have kept that under much more serious review. But because it is in relative terms, modest difference, and certainly one that's been historically provided for, that is why it's retained within this document here, and that's my current proposal. I hope that sets some of the sort of useful context. So you'll be aware the Chief Constable joins us today, specifically because I know that you'll have questions in relation to policing budgets, but I hope that context is useful, and that's the proposal that I'd like you to consider.
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally understand where you're coming from. You've only got to look at what Norfolk settlement is compared to one of our near neighbours in Cambridgeshire, you know, their percentage increase is way above what we see in Norfolk, and that has an effect of diminishing what we've got available to us. So we're very minded of that. So. Chief Constable, I specifically asked if you could be present today. Obviously, when presented a budget and a precept, we have, I think, an overarching duty to make sure that budget is sufficient and meets your needs and requirements. And I have to ask, I think, do you feel the level of support that's provided by a maximum increased budget plus the increase in funding nationally will allow you to deliver police provision across the county for the people of Norfolk?
Thank you, Chair. I prepared some thoughts ahead of the meeting, if you wouldn't mind me just going through them, and I think that would address the very question that you asked. So thank you, and thank you for the invite to the meeting this morning. It's been a year since I was last at Police and Crime Panel, and a lot has happened within that year, and there have been some significant challenges for policing. In addition to the usual high levels of core demand, we've faced new and unprecedented demands associated with things such as policing protests, both locally and supporting the national effort. Each of those new demands, each of those protests diverts police officers away from core functions, doesn't it, such as preventing and detecting the crimes, indeed some of the crimes that the protesters state that they are concerned about. Now, I believe the Constabulary has stood up well to those challenges, and that the county does continue to benefit from some of the highest crime detection rates in the country, and we benefit from an overall 15% drop in crime across the last 3 years. So I believe that we are performing well. However, those drops in crime are now starting to plateau, and crimes such as retail theft are undoubtedly on the rise. We will do all we can to stem any increases, but with sentencing reforms meaning that more offenders are being managed in the community, it's highly likely that many of those offenders who will soon have more time at liberty will re-offend, with that demand being passed on to policing. Those sentencing changes assume that the police will manage this cohort of offenders, but we have received no additional funding to do so. There has also, rightly, in the last year, been significant public concern about child sexual exploitation, both recent and non-recent offending. I do not think that Norfolk is in the same place in terms of offending profile as some other areas of the country, but nonetheless it is a threat that is genuine, live and real here. We now find that 35% of the sexual offences that we investigate occurred a year or more before the crime was reported to us. So we are now investigating a lot of non-recent offending. It's important that we do, but these are difficult, complex investigations at times that require and justify prolonged support to victims. The government has asked that forces establish dedicated teams to investigate these sorts of crimes, a concept we support, but again, we have been given no extra funding to do so. In their manifesto, the government pledged to increase the number of officers working in neighbourhood teams by 13,000, and in the first year of the programme, Norfolk was allocated a target of 31 additional officers, and we have recruited those officers. They are in post. The constabulary, myself, absolutely see the value of neighbour policing. We know that it's the style of policing that our communities want and value dearly, just as I do. Moving into the second year of the programme, which will start in April, on Friday just gone, the constabulary learnt that we've received an additional £0.5 million to recruit another 20 police officers. Now, the full cost of a police officer are £68,000. That includes pay, pension, national insurance and other employment costs. The funding we have been given for next year equates to 29k per officer, so 42% of the actual costs. If we don't recruit the 20 officers, we risk not assessing the funding that we've had for both year one and year two. Essentially, this means that I need to make savings elsewhere in my budget to fund our contribution towards the manifesto commitment of 13,000. To balance the books this year, and assuming that precept is increased by the requested amount, we still have to find £3 million worth of savings. Now, the main reason for that savings requirement is, as you alluded to, Norfolk has received the joint lowest percentage increase in core grant from the government. That figure is far lower than we had modelled and reflects both a reduction in the amount allocated to policing in the summer comprehensive spending review and a policy change from government which has removed ring-fenced funding for police officers. Whilst aspects of that policy change have been really helpful, this allocation was only confirmed last Friday, 11 weeks before the start of the financial year. So from a financial planning perspective, that does create some difficulties for us. The Home Office will state that the Constabulary has received a 1.7% real terms increase in funding for next year. Included in that figure is an assumption that precept will be increased by the full amount. So that 1.7 includes the £15 figure. That 1.7% increase contrasts with the 4.2% increase in pay that was awarded to officers last year, and an increase of 4.9% of the amount the Home Office charges our force for use of national IT programmes. The reality is that even with a £15 increase, we will have less money to spend and will be reducing officer numbers next year. In previous years, we've been able to use reserves to bridge funding gaps, but that can no longer be sustained, and our reserves will need replenishment ahead of significant future cost pressures. And we are also already towards the sensible limit of what would be appropriate for borrowing, so we have to live within our means. Now, as was alluded to by the PCC later this month, we anticipate that the government will publish a white paper on police reform, which will make radical proposals about the future structures of policing. I'm sure that the objectives there are to enable a better policing service, which of course we all support, whilst also reducing costs. I anticipate that the white paper will recognise the inefficiency of 43 police forces doing the same things, and I anticipate that change will follow, but implementation will not be swift. These will be significant, difficult and complex reforms. In the meantime, we're determined to ensure the ongoing safety of our county and not let those reforms be an excuse for poor performance and not acting. We simply can't let things drift, and I won't allow us to do so. My focus and the focus of our officers and staff is to deliver exceptional policing for our county, because that's what the county deserves. Next year, we'll be doing that with less resource, and I will be making tough choices. It will be near impossible for me to match all the expectations of His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. But what we will do is have a determined focus on the things that matter most to the public, answering emergency calls quickly investigating crime well and getting the most dangerous offenders off our street. I have to say that achieving that ambition without the vital precept funding would simply not be possible. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sobering comments, but it was so important that you attended today, and for the committee to understand exactly the, you know, the implications of what's presented, and I'm sure that there'll be questions and comments from members of the committee following both your comments and your introduction, Sarah. Look to the committee. Comments, questions, please. Councillor James, please.
Working. Well, thank you very much for your report, Chief Constable, and I applaud the constabulary for the position that you're in. And I know that more and more pressures are being brought to bear upon you, taking away experienced officers from working in where they would prefer to work into specialist organisations that the government have decided that you want. However, it appears that the money that has been allocated to you, it really is given to you because you're doing so well. So they've reduced it. We're a very safe county. You do amazing work with clear-ups and solving crime, but they don't seem to recognise that the fact is that to do that, you're putting all the resources available to you into the right place, yet they decide that you can cut your budget. And I don't think that's right. And I would hope that the PCC will push to get more money for you from the government to support the good work that you are doing.
Sarah?
Yep, Councillor Easter, I can confirm I've already done that. The PCC sent a collective letter into the Home Secretary advising of our disquiet, I think I would use that word. I also had a meeting with the Policing Minister before Christmas and raised that there as well in terms of maintaining funding. So, yeah, this is absolutely on the top of our list, and I think even areas with different challenges to the ones here in Norfolk are finding this extremely difficult.
Thank you. I've got Stuart, and then I've got Mike. Stuart first, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to give my compliments to the people that have actually written this report for us. It's quite wide-ranging, and it is quite clear and easy to read, so thank you for all the effort that's gone into that. I just want to look at the financial landscape, and we've heard comment on that at page 43. It's quite clear from the report that there's two ways that you can actually raise funding for policing. One is from the tax base, the Norfolk residents, and the other is from the grant from central government. And it's quite clear from what's been said today and in the report that the central government grant is actually less than had been hoped, to the extent that we are joint lowest in terms of increase. So with all of the demands that we've got and all of the demands that we're expecting our police officers and staff to deliver on our behalf, we're actually giving them less money from central government to do so in real terms, which I feel, and this isn't a political rosette attached statement, this is one that is actually for Norfolk. When you actually look at the issues that we have with the rural support grant for government services for council being reduced again, and this as well, it does seem to be those in Westminster haven't an understanding of how difficult it is to deliver across a large rural area. So I wonder whether it may be appropriate for us, if the PCC has written to the ministers, whether we as a police panel should actually consider writing in support of the Chief Constable and the PCC around that issue of that this is regrettable. If we are having staff out there doing a difficult job, we need to give them the money and the tools to do it. So I'm in full support of that increase going forward on our tax base. But at the same time, we need central government to step up, particularly at a time when we've seen in the last couple of weeks that the Home Secretary and others are putting even more demand on poorly performing senior police leaders. you can't do that if you don't give them the money and the support to do the job. So I'd like to look at whether we might be able to reinforce the message that's going from the PCC around this. Thank you, Chair.
I think that's a sterling idea, Stuart. We'll hold that to looking at our options when we've concluded the item. But I think that's definitely one of the things that we, as a committee, need to consider. And so I'll got a note being made of that by Joe, and we'll look at that when we come to summing up. Okay. Mike, I've got you next, please.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Stuart's words there, and if it was a proposal and it needed seconding, I'd be more than happy to second that. I think I'm very aware that probably my ward or division has been sucking up a lot of the police resources with the activities outside the Brook Hotel. And I think our police force does a terrific job in very trying circumstances. And I know they're not frivolous with money. So it would be interesting to know just how and where these additional savings can be made. But as I said, I will more than happily add my name to any letter that goes forward to the government from this committee.
Thank you, Mike. Tristan, next, please. Councillor Ashby.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the information that's been given thus far. Echo the comments and grateful for the hard work that the PCC and the Constabulary are doing. Just with regards to what's been said, as I understand it, so the APCC will be lobbying for funding. One question would be, are the NPCC also doing the same thing? In light of what the Chief said, will they be writing to the Inspectorate to confirm that not everything within the reports can be followed up? And the fact that we simply don't have enough money to do everything we need to do, will we be raising awareness with regards to the priorities of the PCC? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ashby. So that's a welcome sort of point of clarification. So the letter has gone collectively through the APCC into the Home Office. So any letter written by the panel, I would say, has tremendous possibility to advocate in your role as councillors as well as the panel on behalf of the residents of Norfolk. But it isn't a letter from me individually that you would be supporting or referring to, if that, just as a point of clarification. But additional to that, for sure, I have also been making individual representations through sort of political channels, as you'd expect. But on your other points of detail, I'll hand over to the Chief Constable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Some of the panel members might know that I lead for National Police Chiefs Council on Finance. So over the course of the last 3 years, but particularly the last couple of months, I have made extensive representations to Home Office officials about the challenges of the overall policing settlement. I think there's not a police force in the country that does not find the settlement challenging. But in some forces, the situation is much more acute. At 1:30 today, I will be chairing a meeting of the chief finance officers of all 43 police forces. And after that meeting, I will be writing on behalf of NPCC to the Home Secretary in response to the settlement the full settlement that was published last Friday. So we will be making those representations extensively. In terms of the Inspectorate, I did write to them before Christmas when we received a partial settlement, setting out the challenges that this settlement will face. When making statements like I have this morning, I am really worried about the public concern that might follow. And the earlier question asked, well, where will those savings be made from? You know, the very last place that we seek to withdraw resource from is from our call centres, from our emergency response functions, and from neighbourhood policings. And they're the things in my mind that I red circle and don't touch. Similarly, the investigation of child sexual abuse and the management of sex offenders, for me, they are non-negotiables. We always make sure that we adequately resource those areas well. But our officers, our staff are frequently using outdated ICT systems that actually, if capital investment was provided to policing, would enable us to increase our productivity. But we've received no capital grant for over a decade now, so that makes that challenging. My officers are driving vehicles that are frequently off the road because of the age of those cars, and our estate in parts is excellent, in other parts requires some urgent work. And those sorts of improvements are the things that sadly, regrettably, get pushed further to the right every time that we get a difficult settlement. But to reassure, it will be those core services that the public most rely on that we will continue to ensure are insulated from the decisions that we have to make here.
Thank you. I think anybody who works in an environment where, you know, the fabric of where you are needs to be improved, I mean, it's not a nice working environment, it's harder to retain staff. And I think if you've got a estate that needs refurbishment and improvement and can't deliver that because of capital funding not being made available by government, that's a, you know, it's a pretty poor set of circumstances, because you're then still trying to retain staff. And I mean, I know from one of the roles that I have where a brand new premises has been built, and we've had a much easier job of keeping and retaining and attracting new staff, because the old office where they used to work was a dire place to work. And so, I can really see the benefit of that investment, but it's investment for the future. And we don't end up with things like the equivalent in the NHS is QEH Hospital, which is way past its sell-by date and needs more capital investment because it's not up to spec. And I'm sure there are police estate in a similar position across Norfolk and across the country. So, Councillor Buttercofer, Sarah, you're next, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I suppose when I look at these reports, there's a couple of words that jump out at me, and we've just talked about reductions and how you're going to make savings, and it gets to a point where you can only make so many savings. And I've also been looking at the reserves and seeing that some of those are shut down or about to be shut down and closed out. And then I look at future years, because we're not just talking about this year's budget, but we're talking about the medium-term financial plan, and see the size of the savings you're going to have to make in future years if things do not change or improve. And I suppose my question is, or my first question is, how do you keep making those cuts? Because, just where are you going to cut from? You get to a point where you cannot cut anymore. We know what percentage of your money is spent on just keeping people paid to do the jobs they do.
Sarah, you want to?
Yeah, if I just very quickly touch on the question of reserves before I hand over to the Chief Constable. I think it's fair to say that when my term started back in what seems like 200 years ago now, there were sums of taxpayers' money which had gone unspent through things like the commissioning reserves. And to me, that is problematic. If we have taxpayers, or frankly anybody's money, public money, available to put into the challenge of policing, preventing crime, supporting victims and survivors of crime, whatever it is, that money should be spent. So it has been a very particular sort of challenge over the past sort of 18 months to try to navigate and identify a way of spending that money in a way which responds to and reflects the things that the public are telling me are their priorities, whilst also doing it slowly enough to be thoughtful and considered in how that money is spent, and in a way that also reflects this incredibly changeable landscape that we're all working in, and the extremely sort of politically, commercially, operationally choppy waters that we're in. So again, I offer that up just as pure context, and immediately after this meeting, we are having another discussion around the question of reserves, because I think it's fair to say that everybody on this side of the room and probably many people on that side of the room are very alive to the problem that that creates, and I am very concerned to make sure that whilst things may close down, sort of financially speaking, that any money that is spent is being put to good use, but also that we're not overspending those reserves because we're mindful of the future need to maintain that 2.5 balance. So I hope that offers some assurance that it's at least very soundly in our radar, and it's a point of discussion, as I say, this afternoon. But again, on the other points of detail, if I can hand over to the Chief Constable.
Thank you, Chief Constable.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So one of the announcements that was made on Friday with the full settlement was that the ring-fence grant that forces previously received for the recruitment of police officers has been rolled into main grant. The practical implication of that is that, with the exception of the dedicated resources that I have to put into neighbourhood policing, I now have more flexibility in the workforce as to whether I employ police officers, police staff, or invest in technology to do the same function. That additional flexibility is actually really welcome. There'll be a concern, and there'll always be a concern, that, well, the number of police officers are reducing and that therefore must be a bad thing. I think that the real measure that we should have is the focus on the number of police officers actually doing frontline policing roles. What's happened in recent years, where we've had the ring fence grant, is because we get paid per officer, we found ourselves in the situation where we were, because we only got funded for our officers and not staff, we were putting officers in roles that staff could actually do, and that's inherently inefficient, isn't it? So one of the levers that Friday's announcement has given to me is to have a slow change, and it does need to be slow because you do it upon retirement, but a slow transition to what I think is a better workforce mix. So a reduction in police officer numbers, yes, but often with them being replaced by technology or police staff at a lower cost and delivering better value for the taxpayer. And that's going to be one of my main strategies to address these gaps over the years ahead. I do come back to technology though. There are now the technologies out there that could significantly increase our productivity, but they require significant upfront spend. That obviously has impact on the reserves discussion we were having earlier, the situation with our borrowing, and I repeat the fact that we don't get a capital grant. One of the things that in my correspondence with the government, both in my national capacity and locally, has to continually try and push for the restore of either that capital grant or some specific funding for forces to invest in the technologies that would liberate our officers and enable them to spend more time on the street.
Yes, thank you, Chief Constable. Sarah, do you want to come back on?
Sorry, can I ask PCC, have you had the opportunity, or do you intend to try and tap into our MPs to support you with your work in talking and lobbying central government? And also, have you made any attempt to lock into any other types of funding that might be available? I know that you've written to some of us regarding one of your services, so I assume that service is now under threat, and just how we go about trying to close some of this gap. What are your ideas?
I have been, I feel, very proactive in this space, and I have to say that I've had a lot of direct and indirect support from elected representatives of all hues in relation to the letter that you've just mentioned. That went to every elected representative in Norfolk at district, county and parliamentary level. And I've already heard back from Labour, Liberal Democrat and Great Yarmouth's MP in terms of taking action, which is extremely welcome. the situation in relation to partnership is somewhat different to this, because by nature of it being a partnership environment, we have more partners able to take steps to remedy something, whilst also being very mindful of our individual authorities' funding challenges that we have to work within as well, plus LGR and all of those other well-rehearsed aspects. In terms of lobbying central government, I am getting a lot of direct support, particularly from two MPs for South Norfolk and North Norfolk. They have been extremely proactive in this space and have offered support directly through their channels, which is very welcome. As other MPs wish to demonstrate that support, I will very gladly sort of tap into that as well. But as I said earlier, I'm also doing the same within existing channels and through the APCC, as you'd expect.
Sarah, you've got some more points of questions?
Sorry, I've got a couple more questions for you. Second homes council tax. It looks to me like that's gone straight into the base. And I just wanted to check that that's the case, because obviously that was a resource that's come about this year that's new. And I had been going to ask you how you were going to spend it, but it looks like it's already had to be put to other uses. Can you just confirm if that's the case for me, please?
Looking to Simon.
I just wanted to check my power of recall. Yeah, so when we were in this meeting last year, we confirmed that it would just simply go into the wider sort of pot in effect and not be ring-fenced for specific spend. And that was a reflection of the financial sort of landscape at the time. So that is indeed what's happened.
Yeah, so I think the effect is that it increased the number of Band D equivalent properties across Norfolk, and that generates extra money, but that fills up the pot basically. Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate that the money's, had to go straight into supporting that, and that's not a reflection on you at all. But I think it just shows what colleagues said earlier, that government really fails to understand the nature of rural crime and the fact that we don't just have the land to look after, but we have the seas to look after, and we have things like the Broads team to look after. Those of you that don't know, I mean, we have people now living on the Broads who need support and can themselves be vulnerable or causing problems. And I think it's important that the diverse nature of what you guys have to police with the money you're given. The last thing I wanted to ask about was your survey. I don't like the fact that there's been an increase since the survey was done. I know in overall terms, it's not a huge sum of money, but to some people it will be a lot of money. And I think that's very important, and I'm glad you recognise that. Can I ask, when I look, what I did do was compare the figures with last year, and it's nice to see that there's been quite a large increase in the number of people completing the survey, which I think is goodness. But why do we compare figures with a census rather than year-on-year figures? To me, it would make more sense to do that. And it also worries me that we're getting the same comments coming up year after year.
So just to check, in terms of the census data, I think that's just in terms of proportionality, to try and test how proportionate the survey responses are in terms of the demography within the county. Yeah, I'm really sorry. What was your first question? Apologies.
So I suppose we've got, my first question was why we use the census data. I talked about the pound increase from when you first went out to, and also, just looking at the numbers and why the same questions are being asked year on year, what we're doing to try, some of them are obvious, but some of them would be nice to see progress.
Yep. Okay, apologies for, I went down a little rabbit hole mentally. So in terms of the difference, the pound, it works out to roughly 2 pence a week additional. And that's not to excuse it, but just to explain that from my point of view, it was a relatively modest increase. I should also say that the Home Office asked PCCs or invited us to state whether or not we would be seeking greater flexibility when it came to precept setting, and gave us the option of saying whether or not that would be something that we would seek. They talked about that in terms of it being an exceptional sort of basis. That is not something I'm wanting to pursue at all. And in a very large part of that is because I recognise the need for the central government funding to be more, you know, much more strongly the basis of police funding in general and not the local council tax precepting. So I absolutely do take your point, and I agree that this is, I'm just going to say, very far from ideal. What I'm trying to do is take a considered view, given the current circumstances that we're working in, the need to establish that precept, the need to be mindful not only of the survey responses, which I agree it is helpful, and again, given the context that I, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, are working in, I'm really pleased that we've got the level of engagement that we had. It could very easily, given the things that have been said about policing and about Police and Crime Commissioner, could very easily have swung the other way. So I'm very pleased about that. I also take very strong account of the many conversations that I've had with people over the course of my term and over the course of the year. That continuous conversation is a real and live sort of proposition. Within my term, I do spend a lot of time in engaging and talking with residents across the county. And so I'm mindful of the fact that people do raise their concerns and they do talk about things differently. In terms of your last question about why we're seeing the same sort of comments, my very sort of summary reflection on it, and I truly do not mean this flippantly, is that the basis in which the police and our partnership environment is working has not changed. So the things that would have frustrated people perhaps 5 years ago will continue to a certain extent to frustrate them today, and that's because things have not changed sufficiently to enable that distinct change to happen, whether it's additional neighbourhood police officers going out, whether it's additional resource within civil parking enforcement, whatever it is, you know, those kind of dynamics haven't changed sufficiently for people to feel it, I think. That's my interpretation of that.
Thank you. I'm just looking around the room. I don't think I've got any more. Stacey and then Sue, please. Oh, and then David. I better write all these down. I noticed Stacey first, please, then Sue, then David.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question's possibly directed to Simon George, but I'll address it to you, Commissioner, and to the Chief Constable. And it relates to something that the Chief Constable mentioned around the impact of borrowing and kind of being, you know, close to where feels comfortable and affordable. And I guess in the context of where we are with capital spend, not having the capital grant that you would like to have, and then the potential impact of the white paper, I guess to Simon, how confident do you feel that actually we can continue to absorb the type of borrowing that we need to make to sustain that capital investment that we're lacking? And if we don't get what we need in relation to the white paper, does that mean that we are compromising significantly in the future on investment in tech and the things that require sort of infrastructure support for officers?
Thank you, Chair. Oh, sorry.
Hang on. So from my perspective, hold your horses. I think there's
Commissioner first, and then possibly Simon. Yeah.
There's a basis on which this is all working, which is a prudent and generally risk-averse basis. And so advice that I take from Simon as the CFO, from members of the constabulary, from elsewhere, is really framed within that dynamic. So that is the sort of foundational principle, I would say. I also just wanted to reflect on a couple of things in relation to the lack of capital grant. So this question was one of the very first questions asked by the PCCs at the start of our term to the then Home Secretary, and obviously her successor has not yet changed this. And her response was that there was no intention to reinstate a capital grant, and that is to maximise flexibility in terms of spend within local areas. That was the way that she framed it. What that means in practical terms is exactly as the Chief Constable said. Whilst investment has been made over recent years into things like technology, like the built estate, the speed at which that can be delivered is slower by virtue of the capital grant not being available. So there are different ways and means of ensuring that that prudential basis is maintained. And now I will hand over to Simon to just add in points of detail.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would say that the Commissioner's covered virtually everything that I was going to say. The only thing I would draw attention to is the Chief Constable's comment some 10 or 15 minutes ago that there are live examples where investment in technology would yield to greater efficiencies. If those greater efficiencies outweigh the cost of any additional borrowing, then it makes a huge amount of sense to do that. Where it is marginal or the return does not outweigh the cost of the borrowing, then that's a tougher decision. But I think the ideal would obviously be to have capital grant to fund all of the investment that we would like to do to deliver greater efficiencies. In the absence of that, and in a situation where we have borrowed a reasonable sum of money, we have to look at each investment on a case-by-case basis to make sure the return warrants the investment and the cost of that investment in terms of the cost of borrowing. Thank you.
Thank you. Got Sue next, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question really
Sorry, Councillor Catchpole.
My question just overlaps, really. So I was interested to know what kinds of advances we could make if we did have newer technology, shall we say, in place. And obviously in your position, you would, Chief Constable, you would know where we sit with respect to other police organisations, with how far down the track of introducing the newer technology we've gone, and also whether a project has been done, and I assume it has, of exactly what the savings could be to try to justify that investment if we could find it, and whether there's any other way of thinking outside of the box to try to get, if it's hardware or software that we need, from organisations that provide such things. Far be it from me to suggest crowdfunding, but there must be other ways of looking at this as well as the ordinary. Thank you.
I just would like to take the opportunity, because I think your question is absolutely like one of the main sort of questions I suppose I get asked in relation to capital funding, which is basically what more could we do? And I wanted to just take a moment to reinforce the message that the Chief Constable delivered, and that I know that we've spoken about here in the past, which is that the capital funding is also to maintain, not maintain obviously, but to continue the service that we have now. So the Chief Constable talked about fleet, I've talked about buildings, the chair, your sort of recognition of the need for a modern sort of workplace. I just wanted to also say the constabulary are doing unbelievable good work with extremely trying and difficult circumstances in some cases, to the point that even in relation to the fleet, one of the members of the team in my office visited a station, and when they went to open the door, the handle came off the car door. So that's no shade on the constabulary's ability to maintain vehicles, but it speaks to the nature of the fleet and the fact that things are kept going, and the fact that wear and tear in a police environment is somewhat different to the level of wear and tear that we would normally be aware of. I think that's also fair to say. So there are definitely things that can be done in terms of expediting productivity, getting those kind of aspects dealt with, which is, again, as the Chief Constable spoke about. But I just wanted to reflect also on the fact that some of this is to ensure business continues, you know, as usual to a large extent also. I don't want to lose sight of that. But do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I think it's generally considered that any efficient, forward-looking company in whatever sector would invest about 70% of its technology spending on the maintenance of current systems, about 20% of its technology spending on the development of new systems, and about 10% looking at the really forward progressive future stuff. In UK policing, we spend about 98% of our money on maintenance of legacy systems. The Police National Computer, the main database that we utilise to access records of criminal behaviour, was established, I think, about a decade before I joined policing, and is being stuck together with sellotape almost to maintain its ongoing performance. Now, there are national technology programmes in place to replace those ageing systems, but they do take some time to materialise. But there are some practical off-the-shelf products that will be available to us now to modernise the service. And if I give an example of our control room, I've got a wonderful team of staff in our control room. Every time someone calls in, they are spinning multiple plates. They're listening to the caller, they're researching data on multiple force systems, and they are also simultaneously typing up everything that the caller says onto a system. New technology would enable us quite simply to transcribe that call automatically, removing the need for any of the typing, to ensure that the call handler only has to access one system because they've all been linked and confederated together so that you only have to search one system once. And would also, if that caller happened not to have English as their first language, be able to automatically translate and transcribe the call. When someone calls us on a 101 call, on average it takes about 20 minutes for us to deal with the call. That's including the time on the phone, but also the time that the officer or member of staff has to do to type up the report thereafter. I think with that new technology, we could reduce that down to about 12 or 13 minutes. We're an organisation that deals with about 460,000 calls a year. That time saving would be phenomenal. They're the sorts of productivity gains that I think we can bring. I think it would reduce costs, it would enhance service for the public, and it would reduce risk. And I could replicate that across many other functions of policing.
I think that's a superb illustration. Thank you. I've got David next. Councillor Bills.
Thank you, Chairman. And being lucky last, I would like to add my name to the comments that have been made, the support that we are giving to you, the police and your staff, and our police commissioner as well. I think what you do is remarkable to make the people of Norfolk feel safe with the restrictions and problems that you have. I'm very interested to hear about the new technology because I'm sure, and I would like to see you promoting that, letting people know that new technology is being used. I'm just going to make a quick comment. I'm not suggesting we get face recognition in Norfolk, but I read a comment in the paper this morning in some city. They put face recognition in. Within a matter of a couple of 3 days, they had 32 arrests, and the great numbers had been on the run for something like 2 years. Now, I'm not suggesting we bring that into Norfolk, but it just shows what new technology can achieve when used properly. I was also very keen to hear, very pleased to hear that you're talking about more visibility of police officers getting out. I happened to be wandering around Heatherset the other Sunday and bumped into about 12 or 13 officers, which I, needless to say, had a wee chat with, and they were saying they were looking at doing more local on-the-beat in the villages within Norfolk, which went down very well, which I told my colleagues, because obviously if you see 12 or 13 officers floating around a small village, you wonder why. And who do they ring up? They ring up their local county councillor. So I do find it very frustrating, as you do, that the funding we're getting is not based on effort and results. But that's life at the moment. It's not just the police that are going to suffer as well. There are other areas within Norfolk for funding are going to suffer. But just a big hearty thank you very much for what you do. Carry on doing it. You've got the support of all of us, I'm certain. So keep it up.
Indeed, Councillor Bills, I agree with that. Any comment in reply? I don't think there's a question there, but absolutely, I think that's something we can all support, the good work that's being done. So, folks, we have a statutory function that we have to deal with in terms of the Commissioner's proposed budget. Our actions that are required are to note the Commissioner's revenue and capital programme for 26-27, the medium-term financial plan, and the funding and financial strategies. We decide whether or not to support the Commissioner's proposed budget and agree content of the panel's report, which must be made to the Commissioner. Should that be a vote that we consider vetoing the budget, we then have another date in our diary for which the Commissioner could come back to us. And I think from what I've heard, I haven't heard calls that we want to veto the budget. I think the move to increase the council tax to fill actually the void that's being left by not increase, the non-increase or lack of increase in national funding is absolutely required. And I think if anything less than that was proposed, we would probably be vetoing for that reason. And that's why I'm actually quite supportive of the fact that you could consult on about £14. You're allowed to put it up to 15, and why that's the case. And that extra pound a year doesn't sound a great lot. Obviously, it's on top of a quantum of bill which some will find difficult, I'm sure. Absolutely so. But I appreciate why. So we then have the question whether or not there is support for a veto, and I'll look to anyone if they wanted to propose that. And I'm not seeing any hands. So the next thing I would ask is, do we support the budget? Come to my Vice Chairman.
Sorry, I was looking at this because clearly I don't want to veto the budget, the precept increase, because you clearly need the money and need more money. I wondered, I was looking down the range of options, Chairman, of what the panel can do. Yes, I'm sure you were. And I wondered whether there's something about, there's an option here on page 34 of your papers, under 4 and 4.2c. The committee could agree not to support the precept and to set out the reasons why, but fall short of exercising its veto against. Now, I'm kind of against that because it sounds like we're criticising the precept and we're not, but I'm trying to find a way that we can really set out clearly to central government and to others that we are not happy that police funding is being cut, rather than letters. As politicians, we all know that we can write letters till the cows come home, but sadly, they generally achieve very little. And I just wonder if there's something we can do. That's all. I just want to give my full support to the Chief Constable and to the Crime Commissioner to make sure that we're really making our voice heard and not wasting an opportunity.
Yeah, and I absolutely can see where you come from. I mean, 4.2b in the report, support the proposed precept, not the, but express reservations clearly stating the reasons why, and if appropriate, make recommendations for the PCC for her consideration. And that doesn't quite tick the box either, because the I think, you know, the precept is as you know, as it needs to be, as is required. However, the whole quantum of the budget is being impacted by the national settlement, and I did. There was a proposal from Councillor Dark, and that was seconded, I think, by Councillor Sands. That I know it sort of goes against what you were just saying, but it required, you know, asking us as a panel to write out, you know, and set that out to the Home Secretary as to why we feel what is being proposed is, I'll come to you, Sarah, is not sufficient. Now, whether or not they can understand that just within my neighbourhood policing area, if a car is called from one side to the other, it would be equivalent to, in miles and distance, to a police car in Manchester being called right across the city in terms of miles, right across the other side of the city. And if you said to a police command, well, we're going to send a car right from one side of Manchester or one side of Birmingham to the other side of Birmingham to act on a response, they would say, well, that's mad. There must be something nearer than that. But that's what we're dealing with in Norfolk. There's one car on call, and it's the other side of the patch. And you know, it costs money and fuel and time to get those officers from where they are to where they need to be. And I don't think government is understanding that. And the fact that we've got one of the worst, in the group of the worst settlements in the country, you know, we cannot just let it go. I'm sorry, we just can't. So, Commissioner, I'll come to yourself, and then I think I've got Councillor Dark wants to come in as well. So, Sarah, please.
Thank you. I was simply going to say I'm really grateful for the panel's consideration of this. I'm grateful and appreciate your saying that you are in support of the precept position, and I am grateful for the consideration, excuse me, of getting your own concerns into central government. My only, excuse me, my only observation was simply that you will not be the only panel, police and crime panel, with these sorts of considerations. And I wondered if there might be any scope for discussion with other panel chairs to see if, just in terms of elevating the point, you know, so not just an isolated letter from the panel, but perhaps there's something that could be done collectively with panel chairs and vice chairs. That's
absolutely something I can take up with the Eastern region. Of course, Cambridgeshire, just across the border, will say, well, we're all right, we've got 4.6 or whatever percent, double what we got in Norfolk. But we'll see. I mean, that's definitely a route that I'm prepared to take, so that it's a combined response, perhaps, rather than just Norfolk. But I think individually, Norfolk needs to do that too. Councillor Dark, you originally made the proposal. Do you comment on that, please?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. And I take on board what the Vice Chair said, but I think one of the things is we need to, if we are in agreement as a panel, send out a clear message of support around the budget proposal and the precept that's been put forward. And I think if we actually mix the message a bit, because that could cause some issues for the PCC and the police Chief Constable. From my point of view, I look at this and I think it's kind of, they've reached in the bag, and central government have given them some rather difficult Scrabble letters to make a good word out of in this. And our challenge is not with the PCC or the police that are doing a great job in Norfolk, it's actually with that settlement. So I think if we confuse the message and actually you know, almost kind of supported the precept, but didn't support the precept because we've got a problem with central government, that might not give the message we want. So I'd like us to get to the vote around that, but then work out how we actually write that strongly worded letter to central government. And I do take on board the point of consulting with other panel chairs, but at the same time, if we are the region that's got the second or joint lowest rise, we're probably more impacted than any of those other chairs. And I think we need to, whatever response goes into central government, reflects that for Norfolk. rather than something watered down that everybody's trying to ask for a little bit more. We are actually disproportionately affected by this, and we should be saying that ourselves. Thank you.
Absolutely, Stuart, and I think your words will help in terms of guidance into what that what that response needs to look like. So we have a proposal, and that is that we support the precept. However, we'll set out reasons why we feel that the entire budget falls short because of the national settlement, and in turn we'll write to the Home Secretary expressing our gravest concerns that the ongoing savings that are proposed to have to be made to keep Norfolk policed aren't acceptable to us. So that would be my summary of where we've got to. Can I have a vote on that particular aspect, please? Could the panel indicate its support for that, please? That is everybody, so thank you for that. The other items, obviously we've considered the budget, and also we can forget about the meeting on the 21st of Jan, which is good. I've saved you some time, everybody. I intend to take just a 5-minute comfort break now, but before we move on to the next item. Hopefully that will be acceptable to everybody. But thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Chief Constable. Thank you, Peter, in assistance too. But we'll have a 5-minute comfort break and we'll come back straight after that. Thank you. Welcome back to the Norfolk Police and Crime Panel. We move on to page 107, item number 7, and that is a report on the performance monitoring 25 to 29. And I'll invite the Commissioner to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that in previous panels we've always discussed how easy it is to fall into a bit of a trap of talking about the things that are not going well, inevitably, because that's the job of scrutiny, is to look for those sort of aspects. But I wanted to instead just deliberately look at the things that are going, I think, well, that have been progressing. And these are really just highlights from my perspective. So from my singular perspective, I'm not highlighting these as particular areas of good work. It's just a reflection over the reporting period. So I want to start with retail crime. As many of you know, I worked in retail for a number of years on the shop floor. I really do understand the visceral reaction that people working on the shop floor have to things like shoplifting, and the very real need for retailers in maintaining our thriving high streets to get a real grip on loss and wastage. I've been really encouraged, well, continue to be really encouraged by the really fantastic work that Norfolk Constabulary are doing. They have set themselves an incredibly high bar in terms of the national picture, which I look forward to them maintaining. But we've also had really great engagement with national retailers, including just last week a discussion with a national retailer regarding their approach using a powerful piece of software in Norfolk, which I know that members of the Constabulary are looking at using also as a supplement to the ongoing work within retail crime. So I continue to be really encouraged by the diligence and frankly the tenacity of the team delivering on that, because it is an unrelenting area of work. I've done a lot of public engagement, as I continue to do, and increasingly you'll appreciate, because of the doubt around devolution, I was focusing largely on relatively small scale, quite intimate kind of discussions. Those have touched on a huge range of different considerations, with one of the more weighty ones being relating to illegal landfill. And I'm going to use that phrase specifically. It is commonly referred to as fly tipping. And I get quite a number of items of correspondence each month relating to fly tipping. But actually, when I talk with the landowners who are at the sharp end of this, to my mind, when you're dealing with thousands of tons of illegally tipped waste, that, from my interpretation, feels more like a landfill than it does fly tipping. And I was really heartened, but also really disturbed in equal measure by the weight of different notifications towards the end of last year by politicians and landowners across the country, really highlighting the scale of this problem. And indeed, that problem exists in Norfolk. So I want to just highlight that. I know that that will be of concern to many of you, not least the chair, given your sort of rurality as well of your area. It's certainly on my list, while the police are very rarely the lead in dealing with those aspects. It tends to fall to the Environment Agency. Clearly, there's an overlap, which is of interest to me. The other area of work, which is very substantial and which I know you know I have a personal interest in, relates to road safety, and there has been a huge amount of work done on that. I specifically really want to commend the Fire and Rescue Service here in Norfolk for their work in developing the Fatal Crash Review Panel and convening that. And I'd also really like to commend colleagues who sit around that particular table, especially those from the Constabulary, for their very clearly very thoughtful participation in that work. The Fatal Crash Review Panels are a relatively new sort of mechanism to discuss fatal road crashes in some detail, but rather than looking at those specific crashes and then working out what could be different about that specific incident, Instead, it's used as a way to look for ways of changing the system so that when those same factors come together in future, it's less likely to result in a fatality or a serious injury. And I am really impressed by the operational changes that have already been identified. They've only had 3 of those panels, and already changes have been identified and have been rolled out by the maintenance team within Norfolk County Council. So I specifically really want to commend that to you. You may not even be cited on that, but that, to my mind, is a really, really terrific piece of work. You are likely aware that the SAFE system has now been formally and wholly adopted by central government with the extremely long overdue release of the road safety strategy. So because that's so new, obviously I don't want to particularly comment on it in this particular meeting. It's out with the bounds of the reporting period in any case, but I am really looking forward to seeing how partners respond to that, because there has, I think, been an over-reliance on enforcement, not just in Norfolk, but in general. And now this road safety strategy really makes clear that it's a shared responsibility. And I think bringing the type of collaboration that is so clearly in evidence in those fatal crash review panels into the wider scope of road safety will be able to really harness a lot of energy and direction and motivation for the improvement of things here in Norfolk. The other thing that's happened, again, is at an early stage, but I'm really delighted by the level of engagement, is the scheme called Gateway to Employment. And this is working with the DWP, probation and employers to identify routes to work for people on community orders. Again, you may or may not be cited on this. It is really early. We had about 60 different businesses and organisations attend the launch. Really good engagement so far in Kings Lynn. That's not to single that place out, it's just that that's where it started in terms of the engagement with DWP. There is funding via the DWP for that and resource going into supporting that. And again, just to stress, it is really early stages, but the green shoots are really, really promising. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And I know that people leading on that for probation, DWP and key employers are extremely motivated to deliver that, which is really, really welcome. Otherwise, I think it's fair to say that aside from an obvious little gap due to illness, the whole sort of period has been characterised by a level of engagement and discussions with residents across Norfolk, which continue to inform my work, particularly around accountability into the constabulary and bringing points of focus that I receive within my correspondence to colleagues, both within the constabulary and within the wider partnership space.
Thank you, Commissioner. Comments, questions from panel members, please. Councillor Dark, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And in light of the Commissioner's comments, I will preface this, that there are around 20 pages in the report highlighting really good work. But actually, I'm going to focus in on one where there's a statistical anomaly. So I do apologise for that. I just wanted to put that in context. In terms of it, it's around Objective 1, reducing serious violence. The overall trend is good, it's going down, but there is a slight anomaly where in domestic violence related matters it appears to be going up just slightly, not by a large amount. Now, quite often that's caused by, unusually, if you're putting more resource and training in, you're identifying it better, you're potentially getting more public confidence in reporting, etc., etc. But this report actually goes out into, if you like, the public domain without any of that narrative. So I just wanted a bit of an understanding from the Police and Crime Commissioner, or maybe the Chief Constable, as to why that very slight increase in domestic violence within that overall declining trend is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you, Councillor Dark. Yeah, I'm always sensitive around percentage point increases and understanding whether that's just a variation within a plateau, which is a very long sustained sort of trend, or whether it's an early indicator of change. And that's an area of scrutiny that I'd like to bring in general. My feelings on this through discussions with the constabulary and with other members of the public is that my sense is that this is an increase in reporting, which I hope and I feel, based on those discussions, may be an early indicator of potentially an increased confidence in reporting. But I really want to put a big health warning on that, because with anything, we can't ever actually know, like fully scientifically, what the cause for it is. But that's my sense at the moment. I know that the constabulary has done an enormous amount of work, both in training the response teams and training officers and staff in the DA matters training, which was an outcome that was required, and certainly that's been raised at successive accountability meetings. I do continue to get not a huge amount, but a consistent amount of correspondence, perhaps 2 or 3 a month, of items of correspondence relating to domestic abuse and domestic violence. And for that reason, it is a very consistently discussed area of business. I hope that gives you some assurance on that.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Easter.
Can I continue on that theme? Because on Country File last night, I don't know if you ever watched it, but there was an article on there all about this new government's violence against girls and women, published in December. And basically it was talking about the fact that there's no mention in that document about rural areas. Now, we live in a high rural area, and domestic violence portrayed in that programme last night says that help is not easily obtainable, and it's not easily obtainable in Norfolk, because, as somebody said, if it's in Birmingham, you'll get a car within a minute. In Norfolk, if you're on an isolated farm, 25 minutes if you're lucky. What are we doing? Because that will start to reflect in our results. What are we going to do to protect the people that live, who are vulnerable, living in very isolated rural areas?
Yeah, this is an area of business which has been a real concern to me, as I know you know. The need for, when we talk about service and responsiveness into our local areas, for sure that includes the blue lights, response times. But much more importantly, from my point of view, is how people are enabled to cope with and recover from these incidences, because we know that when you've got perhaps a less dense network of roads or public transport that you can then rely on, the ability to access those services is somewhat reduced in our rural areas. So I've been extremely keen to look for ways of remedying that. In this particular space, this is exactly why I've written to every elected representative about NIDAS. The work that NIDAS does, that multi-agency response that's delivered within the MASH, really does take care of those safeguarding aspects that you're sort of alluding to. There is an enormous amount of work done across every single ward in the county. It is an absolute truism to say that domestic abuse, domestic violence is no respecter of geography or class or any other sort of demography. It is absolutely true. And that's why I am so concerned to make sure that NIDAS can continue to thrive over the next sort of 2 years with uncertainty. That work is there. For sure we can do more because the need is so profound. And again, that's why I'm looking to partners to really reinforce and strengthen that proposition.
Thank you. Can't see any further hands. Oh, sorry, Sarah. in my wing. Yeah, Councillor Patikova.
Thank you. I think fly tipping, just going back on your comment, I think we need to look at our recycling centres. Because I know the area, when it's closed, the area around the one in North Norfolk, we get a lot of fly tipping. So it's just something, whoever's. Shoplifting. Having actually caught a shoplifter myself, and actually it's quite traumatic. At the time it's quite exhilarating that you've managed to catch somebody that thinks it's okay to steal from somebody. Yes, the attitude. what worries me, what is being done about the increasing violence for those people? Because those people on those, you know, trying to catch shoplifters, and, you know, I'm looking at the figures here on page 127, and we're not seeing any movement on the solved, really. You know, the numbers seem sort of to stay fairly static. And I think knowing, you know, there's a huge belief out there that we don't do much about shoplifting and that we're not helping, we are, you know, I know everyone's doing their absolute best to help, but it's that increasing that confidence in those staff on that front line. You know, seeing people in a supermarket having to wear a camera for their own safety, it's just, is that really where we want to be going? I just wonder if we can do more.
At risk of sounding a little bit Teflon, but there's more to come. So the need to maintain shop workers' health and safety and welfare is probably the single biggest reason why retailers have talked with me. And that's because they absolutely recognise their requirements, their obligations as employers to maintain that for their staff on the shop floor. And that's why you see things like some retailers telling their staff not to engage with shoplifters, not to sort of go and deliberately sort of intercept them. My perception is through those discussions and correspondence that is directly as a result of their own risk assessments around, you know, how to manage the now inherent risk of shop work, basically. Because you're right, the sort of adrenaline spike that you get when you sort of intercept somebody is very unique. And it is also aligned with, I think, just how much pride there is in a lot of retail work. You know, the pride in making your shop feel welcoming, that it's clean, that the stock is really well presented, you know. But, you know, in the 90s, early 2000s, when I worked on the shop floor, the level of risk just was not the same as it is now. It's an entirely different sort of kettle of fish, really. So for sure, the retailers are really alive to that issue, as indeed are colleagues within the constabulary. So I do want to really stress, on behalf probably of the chief, I could sort of sense that those numbers are incredible in the national landscape. I mean, there are forces who would look on with absolute pure green-eyed envy at those figures, which is why I say they've set themselves a really high bar. But when I talk to the individuals who are developing or have developed and are now implementing that retail crime strategy, there is such a high level of professional curiosity and enthusiasm for working with the retailers, for really bringing that professional curiosity to that space. And I think it's that particularly encourages me in this. It's not to say it's absent from other areas of work. I've said here before how present it is, but it is absolutely sort of, it tingles with it. From memory, and I might just ask the chief to correct me if I'm wrong here or perhaps add to it, if memory serves me correctly, the previous 12-month figure, I think one of the highest sentencing for retail crime nationally may have occurred within that period, which from memory again was multiple instances, so that may explain some of the differential, but it might be useful. Chief Constable, if you've got anything to add, that might be useful on that point.
Okay, so in terms of the figures, they are right at the top end of performance when it comes to the country. When it comes to detecting crime, sometimes the detection will occur a number of months after the crime has been recorded, so there can be a lag before the detection figure comes on, if that makes sense. So it might be a figure that sits at something today might increase upwards. If I can just touch upon your question about violence, I mean we can't stand for that, can we? It's just not acceptable. One of my concerns about retail theft is it's all well and good us arresting offenders by the thousand, but there needs to be swift and effective sanction. And sometimes the delays in the court system means that the sanction follows quite some time afterwards. And we are having to pivot and get ourselves ready for a new approach to sentencing, which will see more of these offenders being managed in the community. Now, the contribution that the constabulary could make towards that is twofold. Firstly, in addition to pursuing criminal sanction, we can apply for civil orders to control the worst offenders. And we will particularly look at civil orders when it comes to those offenders who use violence to complement their offending behaviour. Those civil orders allow us, amongst other things, to ban these criminals from shops, from areas. And we have effectively done that and will continue to do so and monitor the offending. And what we then find is if the offender breaches the civil order, actually the sanction is often higher than the actual retail theft itself. So we're determined to keep using that to protect those shopkeepers. And tacking back about an hour ago, reference was made of facial recognition. We do use facial recognition when it comes to retail crime. So all of the CCTV that we take from store detectives, we wash against the Police National Database, which has a library of the photos we take of offenders when they come into our custody suite. We do that for every bit of CCTV that we receive from retail theft. And that, in part, is behind the reason why we have such a high outcome rate as well. Doing our very best in this area, recognise the impact, and I assure you, when violence accompanies the crime, we'll particularly prioritise those offenders.
Thank you, and I wouldn't want anyone to think, you know, it's not wonderful what you're achieving. It's just that violence aspect that worries me. Seems to be on the increase, not just here, but everywhere. Thank you.
Indeed, and some of the things you see on social media of these things going on across the country, I think it shows others that, oh yeah, it's that, if we go in the way that they did, we'll get away with it too. But it's a combined effort. The stores, with the measures that they take, the CCTV that's provided in the major towns, which I think is a good tool, and also where the business improvement district in the different areas where they've provided things like walkie-talkies to keep shop staff aware that the known offenders are out and about. So yeah, it's a joint effort, but something that, yes, Norfolk needs to be proud of, but we don't want to see it going up. Absolutely. I've got hands up from Stacey and then Sue, please.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, the Chief Constable kind of touched on it a bit, but I'm wondering if you could expand just in terms of, we've had lots of conversation this morning around productivity and what we could do if we had more funding, but the report highlights, and the Chief Constable's just mentioned about broader system complications, changes, demand, and I guess my question to you is how are you creating that sort of shared understanding of demand and likely impact from broader system changes, both on policing, but in terms of key things in your plan, like impact on victims and things?
So just so I'm clear, it's the shared understanding where?
With broader system partners, so sort of the Constable mentioned sort of delays at court, sort of broader sentencing changes. So I guess the questions around in your engagement with partners, how are you kind of creating that understanding of that demand impact longer term?
Okay, thanks for clarifying. I think my sort of slight hesitation was because it is there. Like, there is that shared understanding. And I think a really good example of that was in the early prisoner release, which the county was subject to, as so many, last year. The ways of responding to that were already known and understood, and the impact on different partners was already known and understood. And those discussions happened within the local criminal justice board environment in a timely way. Different issues and potential risks were sort of rehearsed within that space. The constabulary, probation, all the different partners shared what their approach would be, how to a certain extent it was business as usual type operations. It's just that it was in a different format, if that makes sense. So yeah, all of that was shared, and it does mean that the converse is also true, that some of those frustrations are absolutely shared as well. And so, as you would expect, that's why the working groups within the LCJB, the different sort of partnership spaces that already exist, a lot of those discussions, as I say, they already happen. I don't need to cultivate it because it is already known. I think my job is to a very large extent do what I can to maintain it, strengthen it, add more resilience to it, look at where I might be able to work with partners to increase whatever it is that they need in order to have better upstream effects on the constabulary. And as the Chief Constable has alluded to already twice today, the sentencing review and the impacts of that are going to be felt, not just within the constabulary, who will be at the sharp end of it for sure, but also other partners, not least probation. And they've got a whole raft of issues that they are currently sort of grappling with as well. So, yeah, hopefully that answers your question. It is a generally positive sort of conclusion, but absolutely acknowledging that there is always, because of the changing nature of things, there is always work that we can do separately and together to improve things further.
Thank you. Got Sue next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I read somewhere recently that 40% of crimes come under the heading of fraud. What type of fraud is increasing currently in Norfolk? And are the fraud awareness campaigns having a positive impact?
We are obviously having a report on fraud in the scrutiny sub-panel this afternoon, but it'd be interesting to hear input from the Commissioner. Thank you.
Well, it would be, but I'm so taken over by a discussion I had around courier fraud that's kind of dominating my brain, and I'm slightly at risk of overcooking that, just because I know, I've sort of seen and had discussions around the really impressive work that's been done at a regional level, actually, in addressing courier fraud. But so unusually for me, I might just look over to my right and see if the Chief Constable might be able to add anything to that, because it's a little bit dominant, and as you say, because it sits within that partnership space, I'd find that a little challenging.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, fraud is a term that covers many different offending behaviours. The most common frauds that we see in the county are certainly those that are enabled in the online space. So frauds relating to the purchase and non-delivery of items, banking fraud as well. But then we also, in this county, particularly with our elderly population, see quite a lot of the courier fraud that the PCC refers to. Effectively, that is where somebody is contacted, usually by a supposed bank or sometimes by a supposed police officer. It's bogus contact, requiring them to take money out of their accounts because they're sold a lie that there's an attack on their funds. The courier part is when someone, sometimes a taxi driver, sometimes a courier from another part of the country, then comes and collects that money and takes it away, and it's only later that it's found out that the fraud has occurred. An awful to prey on the most vulnerable in society, and those are certainly cases that we prioritise and target. And on top of that, that elderly population also can often be vulnerable to the offers of service payment taken and then the service not being provided as well. It really does take many forms, but predominantly it's the crime in the online space that I think is the thing that's most behind that increase.
Right, I haven't seen any further hands up. No. Oh, sorry, come back to Stacey. Stacey just put her hand up behind you, James. I'll go Stacey and then you, all right.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, it's just in relation to, on page 129, there's a really interesting comment around the seasonality of hate crime and sort of a perception that, you know, at particular points in the year we see sort of an increase and then it drops off. I guess I'm curious from a data perspective actually how much we understand about that and why that might be occurring, whether that sort of aligns with kind of cultural or religious celebrations at particular points in year, or whether that just happens to be a particular trend that we've not sort of discovered yet.
If I may, I'm going to defer answering that directly, and that's purely because I've got several conversations and meetings coming up around hate crime, because I'm looking to do some just very low-key sort of conversations with different people with different protected characteristics. So I would like to explore that further with the individual officers who are working in that space. I'm happy to provide an update by writing or an update at a later point for you, as might be helpful.
That would be helpful, thank you. James, come to you next, please.
I just want to go back to shoplifting, actually. Is any work being done on, once somebody's been apprehended for shoplifting, the reason behind why they're shoplifting? We all know there are gangs out there, which you won't get sensible answers from, but you will get a lot of people nowadays, because pressures on their finances are such that they can't afford to heat their homes, etc., in order to feed themselves or something, they are going out and shoplifting because they see that as an easy answer, an easy way to get some money in. Is any work being done on that at all? Because there is funds available to help these people, as we know.
I think I've read too many reports. I know that there is for sure work going on within the partnership space around drugs and alcohol, substance misuse, and the effects that that has on retail crime, in effect. Just bear with me one.
Yeah, just to add in, so in terms of, it all depends, doesn't it, on the individual, kind of the cohort. So as the Commissioner said, in terms of things like drug taken on arrest and things like that, you're seeing in terms of the data, in terms of some of the out-of-court resolutions and the different pathways that people are taken down and support they're given. Also, I'm thinking about, for example, on things like children, young people, in terms of youth offending. Again, there'll be a particular response to that to understand the cause and also provide a suitable response to those individuals.
Right, thank you. We are asked to review the quarterly update from the Commissioner, which I believe we've done, and look at progress being made, delivering for Norfolk, or the delivering of the Police and Crime Plan. Any recommendations to put forward to the Commissioner? Nothing specific, but obviously, Stacey, you asked for the information, which will be forthcoming. Stacey, you've got another ask, please. Yeah.
Commissioner, I wonder whether it would be a useful opportunity to review the plan in the context of the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy that was released in December by government, and just sort of have a look at how that might influence or impact your sort of delivery strategy ongoing.
Yep, at risk of sounding a little bit, I don't know, weary. I think you're right. There are a number of things which have happened, which we need to review the action plan on. The last panel, we were talking about shrinking the workload because of the mayoral election and then the transfer in, and of course that's completely changed. So yeah, we do need to review the sort of timescales and delivery aspects, but not just on that sort of national provision.
Yeah, I think it's right. I mean, bearing in mind where we are from this meeting to our last meeting, as you say, we were expecting mayoral elections. We're now told they're not happening until 2028. That does indeed give a little bit more surety that, you know, you will still be the focus for the public in terms of policing until those elections in May 28. In the mix of all that, of course, as well, we've got local government reorganisation and what that brings, and when it happens, Obviously, how the makeup of this panel will function, given the overlap between when shadow authorities are possibly voted in and your term finishing in 2028. So it's all up in the air, but I think it's something we're all going to have to keep a focus on. And obviously we will presumably know more about future county elections, district elections, city elections, shadow elections to unitaries, and what those unitaries might look like. Who knows? But it is going to impact on the relationship between how we work, between yourselves and you. And I think we're going to have to keep that ongoing as things unfold, because we get surprises what seems to be nearly every week. So with that, no particular recommendations, but that is definitely to note going forward. Thank you. We'll move on, if we could, to page 148, and that's the information bulletin from the Commissioner, item 8. Sarah, anything you wish to add to your report?
I'm looking at this and then realising that one of the meetings that I wanted to just talk about isn't there, and I think that's because it's an internal one. So part of the action plan focused on the public voice proposition, which I know we've talked about before. You might recognise it because at the beginning of my term there was a discussion around the variability, the perceived variability of the SNAP meetings, the way that priorities were set in different neighbourhood. Yeah, so I can see a nod of recognition there, thank you. So you may recall that I provided the Horizons team within the constabulary with some funding to develop that proposition, and it went out to, it was launched within this reporting period. We've so far had more than 800 responses, which is, so that is already exceeding the number of the size of the population that responds to the ONS survey on policing. So it is already achieving something which we had hoped that it would. As I said, I've had a lot of engagement, a lot of meetings. I'm trying to continue with the workforce portfolio. We've got the Leadership Commission has now commenced, which I'm also putting time and effort into with my sort of APCC portfolio hat on. But I didn't want to lose sight of some of those internal meetings and propositions that are being developed here within Norfolk as well, because I'm mindful of a lot going on at a national level with the Home Office and the like. But I just wanted to flag that that kind of local proposition development is also ongoing.
Excellent, thank you. Panel, any questions, comments for the Commissioner on the report? No, thank you. So that's all as noted. I would say I do my usual and tried to promote the fact that you were due to come to Watlington Village Hall. Unfortunately, you weren't well, and then I had to try and undo all my Facebook posting and put everything right. And actually, it was the one of the parish councillors who highlighted to me that no, you wasn't coming, and yeah, and I undone that for you as best I could. So nobody turned up angry, which is good. But they still want to see you, so that's good. That's good. Moves us on to page 156 and our forward work programme. Joe, anything you want to say on the forward work programme?
Only just to remind the panel that the scheduled meeting on the 28th will now be cancelled. If there's anything in addition that panel members would like to add, include or change, and through you, Chair, the Commissioner as well, if there's anything else that could be added or included, it's up for discussion. So
our next ordinary meeting is down for April the 27th, and you can see the items we've got on there, and then obviously on past July and into next year with provisional dates to be confirmed, which I know is being worked on at the present time. Anything anyone wants to add as an item for consideration? in addition to what we have? No. And the same from yourself, Commissioner, anything you would like to see? In which case, thank you all very much for your attendance. It's budget meeting is always not an easy one, and I think hopefully this year we've got to a point where we will make as forceful a representation as possible for the benefit of those in Norfolk that absolutely rely on the support and need from the services provided. So thank you all. Meeting closed.